We're gonna start in about a minute, I think.
All right.
Wow, Alex R. Kemper. Yeah. I was trying to tag you on the tweet a few moments ago, and I was searching Alex Kemper. I don't know how to search Twitter very well.
Yeah, there's a Alex Kemper who's like a Russian model. So, like if you Google Alex Kemper images, you can get this guy that's like this incredibly buff guy who's not me.
If you guys want to smile for the camera,
Are you gonna do it?
ready? I'm gonna screenshot and tweet later. Ready? Excellent.
All right.
Perfect. We good? I'm ready. Yeah. All right. Well, welcome back, ghouls and goblins, for our last session of the afternoon. Just a couple of announcements I wanted to make. First, we still have 5 prizes to give away in the scavenger hunt, so it is not too late. So please fill out your scavenger hunt clues to be considered for the drawing. And one other announcement, attention all residents that are attending. If I got to find my announcement here. Our president, Dr. Jill Fitch, has generously offered to purchase Ohio Champion for Vaccine t-shirts for all residents that attend today and tomorrow. So if you could email Liz Dawson at Dawson, DAWSON, at ohioaap.org with your name and your address. And Dr. Fitch will make sure that you get your Ohio Champions for Vaccine t-shirt. Dr. Shaw, the got one has been thrown down. Are you gonna pony up JHM mugs? I'm just kidding, you don't have to do that. Those of you that don't know, Samir Shaw is very generous, is one of the editors for the journal. Has had quite the social media campaign on JHM. So if you do not follow him, please do, because it's a worthwhile follow. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speakers and our final session of the day. Drs. Kemper and Shaw are here to share with us articles that change the way we practice in Ohio. Alex R. Kemper is the Division Chief of Primary Care Pediatrics in Nationwide Children's Hospital and is Professor of Pediatrics at the Ohio State University College of Medicine.
So thank you very much for that really kind introduction. And I'm going to have my colleague Samir introduce himself. But, you know, as I get going on, as we start, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to talk. And you mentioned before that there were still 5 prizes to give away. Well, actually, there's a 6th one. So just you wait to find that out. So today we're going to be talking about articles that could change the way you practice with some lessons from Ohio, and I don't have anything to disclose, and neither does my partner in crime, Dr. Samir Shah. First of all, thank you for that kind introduction. Samir, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I am Samir Shah. I'm director of the Division of Hospital Medicine at Cincinnati Children's, where I practice both pediatric hospital medicine and pediatric infectious diseases. And as Dr. Peltier mentioned, I am also editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hospital Medicine. I am delighted to kick in a free mug to the attendee of your choice. Chris, if you or Liz Dawson want to randomly pick someone and send me their contact information, and we will be delighted to send them a leading by example Journal of Hospital Medicine mug.
Fantastic. FOMO no more. Thank you very much, Samir. We will get that information to you.
All I can say is, like, I'm really jealous about this whole mug thing. I didn't know about that. So I'm going to have to hit you up for that later, Samir. And I just want to point out that these 2 pictures, one of Cincinnati and the other of Columbus, were both taken from our respective offices last night and this morning. So we do indeed have good views. So, you know, let me begin by saying, first of all, who has time to read articles? And that's really why we're here today. But I mean, when I'm out talking to busy clinicians, what I hear all the time is, you know, I barely have time to listen to S2. I'm lucky if I get an S1. And, you know, I only look in the left ear, who has time for the right ear. So that's really one of the things that we hope to address over this hour. And to point out the ability to really compress things, I do like to begin these talks by reading an ultra condensed novel. So this year we're going to do Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which, you know, when you condense it, goes as follows. Mr. Darcy, nothing is good enough for me. Miss Elizabeth Bennet, I could never marry that proud man. They changed their minds, the end. So I hope that gives you a flavor of what we're going to be doing over this hour, for better or worse. And the other thing I want to point out is that despite everything that's going on, all the challenges that we've been having since March of 2020, the researchers in Ohio continue to publish studies that could really change the way we practice and improve outcomes for children and their families. So we did reach out to pediatricians across the state to get suggestions from for today. So we're not just necessarily going to our own journals. And I just want to thank all those people who sent in suggestions. And this is really just a sample of the articles that we come in. So again, thank you very much for those of you who responded and sent us in ideas. So with that, Samir, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, let's go. So you all know that respiratory illnesses are the most common cause of pediatric emergency department visits and hospitalizations. And now, as well as early in the pandemic, many non-pharmacologic interventions were implemented to mitigate the spread of SARS-CoV-2 transmission. This included masks, school and business closures, unfortunately, as well as stay-at-home orders. So this study was geared at looking at what happened to acute care for pediatric respiratory illness during this early pandemic phase. Investigators led by Jim Antoon looked at data from 44 children's hospitals, including 5 of the children's hospitals from Ohio, that contributed to the Children's Hospital Association's Pediatric Health Information Systems database. Children 2 months to 18 years were evaluated between January 1 and September 30th over a 4-year period. They looked at over 9 million encounters. The median age of the study subjects were 5 years, ranging from 1 to 11 for the interquartile range, and nearly half of the study subjects were female. What you can see here over the 3 phases defined by the investigators, that starting in late February, the number of hospitalizations for both respiratory illnesses, which is the blue line, and non-respiratory illnesses, which is the gold line, plummeted pretty dramatically, even more so for the respiratory illnesses. Over the course of the early pandemic, expected volumes for respiratory illnesses were 38% of what is usually seen, and expected volumes for non-respiratory illnesses was about 60% of what is typically seen. Those numbers started to trickle up during the pandemic summer phase, but never quite reached what we typically see. And then if we go to the next slide, what is truly remarkable here is you see that there was a dramatic decrease in ED visits and hospitalizations for all ages. But those for ages 12 to 17 actually rebounded pretty quickly and went far above what was typically observed during that time period. And that dramatic spike in hospitalizations in that sort of late June and through July was largely attributable to COVID-related hospitalizations. And for me, as I thought about this, and there's a QR code linking to a fun video if you have your cell phone out, it raised the question for me, seeing this dramatic drop in respiratory hospitalizations. This is the first time that I went without a cold for about 2 years, which was remarkable and absolutely delightful. And it raises the question of, should we be wearing masks while indoors every winter, not just during these pandemic times? So something to reflect on.
It was really amazing how effective masks seem to be. I want to talk about another paper that was published this past year, Magnet Injuries in Children, an Analysis of the National Poison Data System from 2008 to 2019. And I was particularly excited to bring this up at this meeting today because of the really important work the Ohio AAP has done around magnets. So We know that children are attracted to playing with these magnets. And I actually thought that they were off the market until I saw this paper and learned that they're sticking around. So what can we do to help families police this in their home environment? And I think that if you take a historical perspective, or at least a recent historical perspective, it's really interesting. So in 2012, based on the dangers of these magnets, these really small, powerful buckyballs. In 2012, sales were halted and there was a recall. And by 2014, there were limitations on the products. But what happened in 2018 is that the recall order was overturned. And now anybody who's 14 and older can purchase them. And of course, you know, once they're around in the house, they can cause danger. And so this study was based on the National Poison Data System, which aggregates data from 55 different poison control centers across the country. And this is the real key take home from that paper. And I just want to walk people through it. So first of all, if you look at the stippled line that's on the top, that shows the number of cases that got into the poison data system. And you can see this marked increase. And then you can see that in terms of the harm, the gray stipple line is a major effect, and then the solid line refers to the moderate effect, and you can see that over on the right. So both the number of cases and the number of children who have been injured by these magnets went dramatically up as the regulations were rolled back, such that between 2018 and 2019, nearly 40% of the injuries happened within this narrow time period. So, you know, on one hand, it shows the effect of regulation. On the other hand, sadly, it shows what happens when those regulations are removed. So I think that this is a great case study. I said good case study, but I really probably should have said a great case study, the effectiveness of policy to reduce exposure to something that can really injure children, and what happens when you let your foot off the gas or brake, gas, whichever way you think about driving. In any case, it wasn't good to be doing that. And I think that this is a great case, a great opportunity for advocacy, and hopefully something that members of the Ohio AAP could pick up. I actually think it would be great for our trainees as well, given the harm that we know that comes from these magnets.
So Yemisi Jones and colleagues from Cincinnati Children's wrote an article called Collateral Damage, which was, I think, a marvelously titled piece about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on women physicians. And what they highlighted was that this pandemic may exacerbate existing inequities between genders with longer-term consequences. And they highlight the increasing demands at home. So female physicians are more likely to have employed partners, and they certainly report spending more time on household activities than their male counterparts, the exaggerating leadership gap. And this is an issue where the general lack of female representation in institutional policy creation may lead to policies or procedures that inadvertently negatively affect female physicians disproportionately or fail to consider their needs. Issues with compensation. Women are more prevalent in pediatrics as frontline workers, and so they are at greater risk of needing to take unpaid leave to care for sick family members or when they become ill themselves. And then issues of physical and mental health, that the rate of burnout is higher among female physicians. And they propose several potential solutions. And what you see on the right here is a Twitter hashtag, give her a reason to stay in healthcare. And this was a movement that was started recognizing that women were disproportionately leaving the workforce over the course of the pandemic. What they recommended was to monitor the direct and indirect effects of COVID-19 on women physicians, to identify and secure support for the needs of women physicians, to provide a mechanism to account for the lack of productivity during COVID-19. This is both on the scholarly side, but potentially also from an RVU standpoint for those practices that are based in a productivity model. To reward increased efforts in areas of clinical or administrative contributions that result from the pandemic. Certainly over the course of the pandemic, many people shifted the type of work they do to best meet the needs of the patients and the institution and the families of the children we care for. To support and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and also to advocate for fair compensation for providers caring for COVID-19 patients, which does place women potentially at disproportionate risk. And I would go a little bit further than that. It's not enough to say monitor the direct and indirect effects of the pandemic, but I do think we need to think proactively about how we mitigate these issues and ideally prevent them from happening altogether.
This is such a great paper, and the recommendations, although they're certainly timely, are things that we really should have been focusing on for a long time. So I'm so glad that you brought this paper up. And I'm going to transition a little bit, and I'm going to talk about another paper that came out about traumatic brain injury, looking from early childhood to adolescence, a study from the Ohio Head Injury Outcome Study. And this is really interesting to me because I didn't actually know that there was this longitudinal assessment that was going on here in Ohio. So this asks the question about, is there anything new that can help me as a pediatrician in terms of planning for the recovery period? And this study is based on a prospective long-term study of children between the ages of 3 and 7 years of age who had traumatic brain injury, very serious ones. And what's nice in this report too is they compared children who had traumatic brain injury to those who had orthopedic injuries but not traumatic brain injuries, so that you could really try to tease out what the specific effect was of having traumatic brain injury. And I'm not going to go through all the particular findings in this study, but I do want to highlight what I thought was a really important lesson, certainly for me as a general pediatrician, and that's the really high family burden that related to moderate and severe traumatic brain injury. Even a long time later, it can be very difficult, certainly in the management of the child, but it can also be stressful for the parents, lead to depressive symptoms, and just cause all sorts of problems that go beyond the individual. Another point that was really, I think, important is that the school services and the accommodations that were available to these children often didn't meet the needs of the children. And finally, that the children that had these traumatic brain injuries oftentimes had persistent problems with emotional functioning and social competence. So the take-home lesson from this is really down the road, even after long time after the injuries, to really think about what the lasting impact of these traumatic brain injuries are on the family, and really think about things from a holistic viewpoint. So like I said before, when taking care of children with traumatic brain injury, make sure to think about things in the entire family context, and think too about arranging psychological support. That, we spoke in this meeting this morning about the importance of psychological support for depression and suicide. And I think this is just another reminder of the benefits of psychological support. And then the other thing is to continue to partner with families and schools to try to improve long-term outcomes.
So keeping on the theme of head injury, this study looked at trends in the performance of head CT after traumatic head injury. So there are over 750,000 pediatric ED visits for traumatic head injuries each year. We know that head CT for assessment is sensitive, meaning you identify almost all pertinent or medically consequential injuries with this mechanism. It's specific, meaning you don't see many false positive test results. It's fast and widely available. The PCARN head injury rule was published in 2009, and that's what you see to the right of your screen here, that provides some guidance on management and when you ought to perform a head CT if a child presents with traumatic head injury. And the goal here is to minimize low-value care. And this group used data from the nationwide emergency department sample. This is the largest publicly available all-payer emergency department database, and it's sponsored by AHRQ, or the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, a federal funding agency. And this includes data from about 900 hospitals each year from about 30 states per year. And they use this weighted sampling approach, meaning that each visit accounts for more than one visit, depending on the particular demographics and regional location of that patient. And this approach, which has been well validated, allows you to use this database to calculate national estimates of head injury and test performance. And what they found, looking at the years 2008 through 2013, and remember the PCARN head injury rule was published in 2009. And I think the two things that stuck out for me is, worrisomely, visits for closed head injuries did not decrease over time. And in fact, for a couple of years were extraordinarily higher. And I think just as unfortunate, the proportion of visits with performance of a head CT didn't decline and actually, unfortunately, increased over time. So we have this robust, validated rule that was intended to help decrease the performance of unnecessary head CT studies. And unfortunately, over this time period, about 1 in 4 children who presented to the emergency department for evaluation of a traumatic closed head injury received a head CT. When you look at it broken down by the type of hospital, what you see in this figure on the right-hand side is that among metropolitan teaching hospitals, there was a trivial decrease in imaging over time, not a decrease that I think would be clinically meaningful. And unfortunately, at metropolitan non-teaching hospitals, as well as non-metropolitan hospitals, there were actually substantive increases in the performance of head CT. So we know that it takes 17 years on average for research to reach practice. We also know that only about 14% of research conducted ever reaches the patient to influence the type of care we provide. And we know that only 18% of practitioners report using evidence-based practices frequently. And I think this does mean that perhaps we as a society need to prioritize and invest in evidence implementation. It's great if we have all of these discoveries, but if we're not using these discoveries to improve the care and outcomes of children, then we're failing our children at some level. And so I do think the way forward is more funding on how do we implement these practices in an efficient and effective manner. And I do think the federal funding agencies need to invest even more than they have over the past decade into evidence implementation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to give a shout out to the Ohio AAP as well for the work that they're doing around quality improvement, because I think that's a great way to bring the state together. And thinking about sort of bringing the state together to address a problem, the AAP just recently provided new guidance about the prevention of drowning, led by our own Sarah Denny, who was an active participant earlier over the course of the day. So clearly we know that drowning is the leading cause of unintentional morbidity and mortality. What does the new technical report say that we can do to help children? So I think about this sort of comprehensive approach to layering things on to protect children. And I'm just going to read through this list, but if you look in the technical report, there's a nice description of how effective these various things are, but it's clear that we need to layer these things up. So adult supervision, lifeguards, anti-entrapment and anti-entanglement measures, pool fencing. One of the things that I thought was really important is the pool covers alone don't solve things, right? Especially because you can sink into the pool covers. There was some question about the effectiveness of pool alarms. Certainly door alarms trying to keep children inside and when they go out to be warned about that. Bystander CPR, swimming lessons, water survival training, and water competency. But again, it's very clear from this technical report that you can't just rely on the swimming lesson side of the equation on its own. Life jackets and boating safety. So it's really just critical for us as pediatricians to advocate for all these things and make sure that our patients and families don't rely on just one component of this.
All right, we're going to shift a little bit away from injuries to some other challenges. Kathy Auger led this work, which, in just full disclaimer, I was also a part of. I love this title, Counting the Ways to Count Medications. So polypharmacy is defined as receiving multiple medications to manage health conditions. It's often defined as receiving 5 or more medications. And polypharmacy has important safety implications for children. Polypharmacy increases the likelihood of medication errors. And because for children, certainly multiple caregivers may administer medications, and dual administration of the same medication by both parents, meaning there's an evening dose of a medication, one parent has administered the medication, the other parent doesn't realize this, also administers that same medication. That dual administration is the most common reason for pediatric calls to poison control centers. Most polypharmacy research focuses, at least for children, focuses on children with seizure disorders. So Dr. Auger and team asked a seemingly simple question: how many medications is this child on? And they presented 4 scenarios to physicians, nurses, and parents. And what I'm going to do is I'll draw your attention first to panel A. Amoxicillin twice a day by mouth, fluticasone twice a day by inhaler. Everyone who participated who looked at this scenario said this patient is on 2 medications. But it gets a little more complicated. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about panel C and what happened. This child was on topiramate by mouth, 3 mLs by mouth each morning, topiramate 5 mLs by mouth each evening, and rectal diazepam as needed for seizures. Some respondents said, that's 1 medication, it's topiramate, that's it. Some respondents said, no, that's 2, it's topiramate and diazepam. Some said, no, that's 3. And they counted the different doses of topiramate as different medications. Interestingly, one parent said, my response would depend on who I'm talking to. If I was talking to the pediatrician for panel C, I would say 1 medication, which is topiramate. If I'm talking to the babysitter, I would say 3 medications, because there are 2 different doses of topiramate, and those doses are important. And if my child has a seizure, the babysitter needs to know that diazepam is a medication that my child is on. And so a seemingly simple question ends up getting very complicated very quickly. If we could go to the next slide. So what are the implications of this? I think as physicians, we don't know how a parent or a caregiver will prioritize medications to give to their child, and whether families will count medications as a group or as distinct entities. And it may depend on with whom they're interacting for that. And then providers, patients, and families share a list of medications at discharge. But that list may contain medications that we as physicians don't count as medications. But that is the list that families must navigate once they get home. And so it's incumbent on us to work with families to make sure that we have a shared mental model, a shared understanding of what medications their child is on, and how do we help them and all of the other folks that provide care for that child navigate this complex issue.
I agree with you. I love that study, and it just goes to show this gulf that can happen between what we think happens in the clinical world and what families are doing. So kudos to that. Great study. I want to highlight another policy statement that came out this year. This one asking, what can I do to address toxic stress, build resilience, mitigate trauma, and ultimately improve health outcomes? So, if anything that we've learned over the past year and a half or so is that there's certainly a lot of toxic stress out there, but there are things that we can do to help address these issues. So this policy statement really gave some great practical ideas for things that we as pediatricians can do within our offices. And I just want to highlight some of them. Providing a safe physical and emotional environment. Be committed as an institution to trauma-informed care and do that across the healthcare system. To partner with patients and families, Samir, that's like been a real theme for the articles that we've have this year. And then the other thing is to recruit and train a compassionate workforce. That's both important for the people working in the clinic as well as people that are coming to visit the clinic. So this is just a really nice and very important policy statement. And I know that these policy statements, they take forever to make. It's like, geologic time to get agreements and to get them approved. And the timeliness of this one, given that I know the authors must have been working on this for eons, it was really remarkable. I want to highlight another related study to that guideline, and this is looking at Medicaid's EPSDT benefit and whether or not we can leverage the screening requirements in EPSDT to improve screening for social determinants of health. And so we know that social determinants of health are common. Lots of our patients have really serious social needs, and we wouldn't find them without screening. So the question that this study was asking is if Medicaid made screening a requirement, would that help, or would it have an adverse determinant for your practice's economic health? And so this was a review of papers that were out there combined with key informant interviews. And what they found is, first of all, is I think any of us who practiced in more than one state know that Medicaid agencies really vary in the EPSDT requirements. They do look at Bright Futures, and actually Bright Futures is within the within the Affordable Care Act, rather, the requirements that shape well child care. It's clear that screening will identify additional need, but the thing is, how do we make sure that we have the resources when we find these needs? And what they found from doing some of these key informant interviews is that there is a risk that some practices could stop taking Medicaid enrolled patients if they were required to screen for social determinants of health and other social needs, especially if there weren't sufficient support to be able to do that follow-up. So it's bringing social determinants of health screening into EPSDT could be a huge benefit for our patients, but we have to make sure that there's systems in place for management. So again, there's clear evidence that there's potential benefit, but we need scalable models and support for practices. And sometimes when I think about coordinating follow-up after screening for social needs is like the the Columbus highway system. Things keep changing and it's hard to know exactly where to go. And it can be really difficult to coordinate those services. So I know that there's a lot of work being done on this across the state, and I'm excited to see where that goes. But Samir, do you know what time it is?
It is time for the I Know Ohio Better Than You Stanley Cup.
That's exactly right. This is actually why everybody is still listening in at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. So this is a new feature to this presentation, which hopefully we'll get invited to do again next year. The winner of this contest is going to get a wooden cutout of Ohio. It's not life size, so they'll be able to manage it. And they're going to be able to keep it for a year. And what I hope is that the winner will take pictures with it, in their practice and in their favorite watering hole, wherever it is that they like to go, and send the pictures into the Ohio AAP so we can see where this thing is going. So it's a fabulous prize. For those of you who are wondering, Samir and I researched the questions that are about to come up through an intensive Google search of Googling interesting facts about Ohio. So you can't argue with the internet. Everything that I'm about to show is completely true. And if you disagree with it, then you can bring it up with Google. And I have asked the staff at the Ohio AAP to monitor the responses that are about to come in the chat. And from among the thousands of correct answers that come in, they are going to let us know who the winner is. Okay, everybody ready? All right, ready for the first question? What city had the first traffic light in the USA? Okay, start putting your answer in. I see some Daytons. I see a Cleveland, Springfield. Okay, all right, Cleveland. So for those of you who picked Cleveland, you are correct, at least according to Google. All right, let's go to the next one. Bonus, what year? If somebody puts in the 1700s, we know they're wrong. Go ahead, I'm looking at the chat. 1928? All right, 1914 is the year. All right, ready for the next one? Samir, you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you excited?
I am pumped.
All right, where was the cash register invented? All right, I'm seeing a range of answers.
Toledo's.
The answer is Dayton, according to Google. All right. What year? That's the bonus.
Could it be 1914?
1920, 1894, 1897. Are we playing Price is Right rules? We didn't establish that.
We did not.
All right.
I would say distance too.
All right. Samir, how many US presidents were born in Ohio? I know when I go to Disney, the first place I want to go is the Hall of Presidents.
Yeah, this is a tough question. I would say it has to be a lot.
Oh, 5, 6, 7. 7. All right. Which of the following presidents was not born in Ohio? I hope everyone gets that right. For those of you West Wing fans. All right, but there's a double bonus for this one. Which one served 2 full terms? I'm looking, I'm waiting, people are thinking. All right, I saw it come in. Grant. All right, what proportion of the US population lives within 500 miles of Columbus? All right, I see a 25%. 25, all right, 50, 100%. 100% wish they lived within 500 miles of Columbus. All right, as it turns out, according to Google, it's 50%, which is sort of amazing, don't you think? But I guess if you
That's
get New
incredible.
York and West Virginia and East Virginia, it all sort of works out. East Virginia, I don't think that's a place. All right, we're almost done. All right. What's special about Sundays and the 4th of July in Ohio? A, time to be with your family. B, you can't be arrested. C, fireworks. D, the best time to close your open notes in your electronic health record. I see a lot of fireworks. Time to be with your family. Funny enough, I know, oh, somebody said B, and according to Google, that's correct. No person shall be arrested during a sitting of the Senate or House of Representatives within the hall where such session is being held, or in any court of justice during the sitting of such court, or on Sunday or on the 4th of July. So that's there, 1953. I would not recommend that you go out and test this, but it's there. So I'm monitoring the chat, and I'm hoping that one of the great Ohio AAP staff members picks a winner amongst the thousands of answers that just came in. So go ahead and figure that out, and we're going to go back to our job. All right, Samir, you're back on.
All right, we are talking about BRU, but not the fun kind. So brief resolved unexplained events, which is, as you all know, changes in color, breathing, muscle tone, or consciousness in the first year of life. These are often explained by normal infant behaviors, but occasionally reflect a serious underlying condition, and that's where the challenge is. It's clearly alarming for caregivers and really challenging for clinicians. So the AAP had published management recommendations, including the name change away from the apparent life-threatening events, and this was published in 2016. So this group used data from 11 children's hospitals. They included children who were less than 1 year of age, so meeting the guideline criteria, and were discharged between the years 2015 and 2018. They identified nearly 5,000 infants discharged with a condition known to be associated with BRU. They reviewed these charts, and they found out that about 2,000 of these were actually evaluated for what we would generally consider BRU. And what they found was a little bit disheartening.
Oh, sorry.
I tried to pause there.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. I was speeding you up.
And the challenge here is the guideline was wonderful, but this study highlights just how challenging this condition is. 87% of infants had higher risk factors as defined by the AAP guideline criteria. But most of these infants did not have any serious condition. And the positive predictive value, if you had one higher risk factor, the positive predictive value in identifying a serious underlying condition was 4%, which means that most children with a higher risk condition, sort of C point A, did not actually have a serious condition ultimately. In this study, only 4% of infants had a serious explanatory diagnosis, something like seizures or infantile spasms, 23 infants, an airway abnormality, 13 infants, abusive head trauma, 7 infants. So this is a challenge because the diagnoses in these categories are worrisome, serious, and they need assessment and potentially treatment right away. The challenge is that that's not most infants. And so the implications here are BRU is challenging despite the availability of these guidelines. And this picture you see here, that's the look I had on my face after reading this study. It does highlight we have an opportunity to improve identification of infants with BRU who are at high risk for poor outcomes. This is another area, if we think about where could one make an impact, being able to identify either who's at disproportionate risk or I think just as good, who's unlikely to be at any meaningful risk that would inform triage decisions when these children present for evaluation in the emergency department setting or even in the pediatric office.
It's just so hard because, you never want to miss one of these cases, so it just speaks to the challenge that we all have as pediatricians. But I want to switch gears and talk about something that's really positive that we can all be involved with. And this was a study that was recently published, the combined Reach Out and Read and Imagination Library program on kindergarten readiness. So, at this meeting, oftentimes the issues of literacy and Reach Out and Read are brought up. It can be challenging to deliver Reach Out and Read with high fidelity to the model in terms of showing families how to use books and that kind of thing. And so it can be difficult in practice. But we also now more recently have the Ohio Governor's Imagination Library modeled on the Dolly Parton library. But again, it can be difficult to help patients and families sign up for that in the clinic. So the question here is it shellfish of me to question the value of this additional work, or should I open a new chapter in my practice? So this was a retrospective study looking from 2016 to 2018, comparing kindergarten readiness as the outcome between those participating in Reach Out and Read and the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, or actually it's the Ohio's Imagination Library, comparing those who did and did not participate. So, I just went back up. So the authors of the study were taking advantage of a natural experiment, comparing those who were exposed to these things and those who were not. It's very difficult to study things like kindergarten readiness because there's so many factors that go into it, and the timeline before kindergarten readiness happens, in the life of the child is a long time. So it's a really, really difficult thing to study. And the Imagination Library came together very quickly as well. So I just want to give the authors a special shout out for what I thought was an innovative and creative way to study something that's important. And I think it's really important to understand how creative these authors were as I get to some of the findings to put them in the context. And so this is what I think is the key slide. So it shows in the paler bar to the left across each year, kindergarten readiness overall across the district. And this was done in Cincinnati, so whatever that county is there, which I know I should know, but I'm still relatively new to Ohio. First of all, if you look across the 3 years, between 58% up to maybe 62% of these children were kindergarten ready based on the readiness tests that are given when they start school. So certainly that's not something that we should be proud of. But when you look at the subjects I say subjects, but there's kids, who got exposed to the intervention over time compared to those who weren't, what you can see is that their kindergarten readiness score steadily increased from about 43% to 58%. So if you look at the gap there, it does look like the gap is shrinking, and that these interventions can really be effective in terms of helping kindergarten readiness. So sort of keep this image in mind. But what again I want to highlight again is just looking at the percentages. It looked like the literacy subtests increased, but the problem is not the problem. I guess it's just a reality, right, Samir? Is that it didn't reach statistical significance. But this is a really difficult thing to study, and to be honest, oftentimes you don't think of it. There's so many factors that go in. It's actually hard to do this kind of study and show that these kinds of interventions are statistically significant. But if you look at the trends over time and how the gaps shrunk, I think this is pretty compelling evidence, and we shouldn't necessarily worry all the time about the tyranny of the p-value. So again, the conclusions that I want to take, that I hope that everyone takes from this, is that again, these are difficult studies to do in terms of matching and finding out about kindergarten readiness. There are all these other factors that are involved. But when you think about Reach Out and Read and combining it with the Imagination Library, this is really a low risk, high yield intervention. It's easy to sign people up. There's decades of evidence about Reach Out and Read. And it seems like when you combine the two things, it's chocolate and peanut butter. The two great tastes, that taste great together, that there is this benefit. And so I would really encourage everyone that's listening to this that's in primary care to think about how you can sign families up for the Imagination Library. Samir, you want to do this?
Yeah, so one of the things Alex didn't mention at the start of this is that we hopped in a car together and drove around Ohio searching high and low for the best articles. And as we drove around, we came across some interesting signs that we thought would be fun to share with you. This first sign that we saw as you're coming up 71, going from Cincinnati to Columbus. Right as you start hitting Columbus, where you intersect the sort of 70 and 270, this is the sign we saw. I was told it has been there for decades. They keep doing construction, and it will never end. I don't know if that's true, Alex, but that's what I've been told.
It's 100% true. I just think they turn the sign around and stuff.
All right, time for a little bit of a dad joke. Terrible summer for Humpty Dumpty, but he had a great fall. Drum roll.
But I'm pumped. And my favorite one.
And this one, one of the interesting things about the pandemic, and I think that is in some ways, if there's a silver lining in the most sort of dismal time, is that wages have increased across many sectors, and that is great for folks that are trying to make a livelihood and raise families, and hopefully, one doesn't need to work 3 or even 2 jobs or 3 jobs to earn a living. But we saw this one driving by the Dairy Queen. Abby, you need to show up for work.
Abby, where are you? All right, let's do this. Let's recap. What did we learn over the past nearly an hour? Number 1, wearing masks can decrease respiratory illnesses overall. Magnets still pose a risk to our patients. Advocate for fair compensation for all healthcare workers during the pandemic and beyond. And the family burden associated with traumatic brain injury is high.
We should use the PCARN head injury rule when considering a head CT for children who present with a closed head injury. We need to work to prevent drowning. We need to learn strategies to improve communication with families about medications. And we need to work to ensure that your clinical setting can provide trauma-informed care.
How about addressing social determinants of health has a significant benefit for our patients and their families. Determining which infants with BRUC have risk for serious underlying medical problem is challenging, but we need to do it. And then number 11, use reach out and read in your practices and refer to the imagination library. So before we end, now I'm gonna look over to the bottom. Do we have, Chris, is there an official winner from our quiz?
Oh, you know what?
There is. Haley, you want to give me that?
Hey, Chris, if I may interrupt for
Please go right ahead.
Yeah, if we want to just have a round of applause that Haley put this in the chat box, that the FDA has approved the Pfizer vaccine for children 5 to 11 years of age.
Yay, it's like a miracle,
Awesome, that is fantastic. So then I believe the next step should be, ACIP's meeting on the 2nd and 3rd, and hopefully by the end of Wednesday, ODH will hopefully be shipping out to practices that have registered. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. So thanks for setting that up. That was perfect. We're going to talk about, Bob Frank and I are going to give an update on COVID vaccine and kind of walks practices through how to order through ODH and all of those things. So guys, thank you so much. We do have a winner. So the winner of the trivia game is Dr. Sarah Guerrero-Duby from Dayton Children's. So Sarah, Liz or Haley will be in touch with you to work on that. So
I'll need her
thank
address.
you very much, guys. Thank you so much. This was the perfect way to end the day. It was such a, obviously very informational. You guys did fantastic sort of incorporating adult learning theory in your presentation, and I tweeted about that. So really appreciate that. There've been a lot of comments. I'm not sure we really have any questions. So we've got a couple of minutes before 5 o'clock. If anybody has a questions for our panelists, I'll throw a question out there. And this, both of you are very involved in publishing, and obviously Samir is a journal editor.
And Alex.
And Alex too. Yes, that's great. Pediatrics, exactly. I'm sorry. That's right. You and Dr. First of pediatrics. So do you guys have so obviously lots of things changing, right? This whole COVID deal is evolving very rapidly, right? Lots of studies being published. Recently there have been a couple of studies that have been redacted and criticized, one of which was the mass study. What's your comment, and how do you as editors sort of do studies that are coming out very rapidly and you want to get the information out, but yet obviously these studies are not the length of time that many of the studies that you used to reviewing for your journals go through. So what are some of your comments on that?
Samir, do you want to go first, or do you want me to hit it?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a shot. I think, a huge thanks to those who peer review for any medical journal. It is so helpful for helping us as editors decide how we ought to proceed with a manuscript. And they are instrumental in giving authors feedback to help improve the quality of the manuscript, regardless of whether that manuscript is ultimately accepted or not. And during COVID, reviewers, in addition to busy clinical practices, as hospitals have been overwhelmed, as outpatient practices have been overwhelmed, are still turning around these manuscripts incredibly quickly. And for that we are grateful.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that the volume of manuscripts that we're receiving has gone up by more than a quarter since the pandemic started. And what's interesting is it's not all COVID. I think there are a lot of projects that people didn't have time to finish when there was initial drop down in clinical volume, they were able to turn their heads to it. But we are receiving many COVID articles. We have a system in place where we try to have all the COVID manuscripts complete peer review within up to 4 weeks. And we are working with a lot of experts in the field to be able to do that quickly. And then once a paper is accepted, we're able to pre-publish it online within about 5 days of final acceptance. And we're making all of our COVID-related articles free to the world on our website. But you're exactly right that we had to be very careful. And so we have like multiple layers of reviews for it. And I can give you examples, like we published very early on a case report of myocarditis and COVID vaccination that had 7 subjects in it. And we were very, we wanted to make sure that that was right, because, obviously we don't want to dissuade people from getting vaccination, but we also wanted to make sure that pediatricians on the front line knew that this was a potential concern. And so we were able to get, a bunch of experts to weigh in on it. We had a commentary to put the work in perspective. And then fortunately, very soon thereafter, we were able to have an article that was able to provide a more population level explanation of what's going on. But you're entirely correct, Chris, that we have to be very careful about not publishing false information. And so again, we're lucky that we have expert reviewers. And when we put something that we think might be confusing, we run a commentary with it. But this has been a real lesson for us in terms of how fast we can get things out, while also doing our best to make sure that the scientific record is correct.
Great. Thank you very much. And, I think this session, and, there was a comment, Tina Chang was part of our executive committee meeting this morning, and she's fairly new to Ohio. She's our new chair at Cincinnati Children's. I was really just amazed at all of the work that this chapter's done. And I think we sometimes take for granted and don't realize how amazing and how much fantastic work is being done every day in Ohio. We're very lucky to have such strong medical schools and children's hospitals in this state. And I think that your presentation just really solidifies that. So thank you for everyone that takes care of children, that does research, that publishes, anybody that touches the lives of children in Ohio. Really appreciate all that you do. There's a question from Dr. Garner. Given the tidal wave of emotional and behavioral health concerns that will be following this pandemic, what should we be doing to prepare?
Well,
wow.
I would say it's not just following the pandemic, it's during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've certainly published a lot about the implications of the pandemic for behavioral health issues and not only for the child, but for the whole family. I wish I knew the answer, right? We have a major workforce issue in terms of psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. There's no way for pediatricians to answer all this kind of stuff. So it's going to take it's going to take a very complicated village as we move away from the pandemic. But Andrew, I would say that for me, that's your question is top of mind. And the only thing I can say is hopefully, at least within the state, the Ohio AAP can help lead the charge in figuring out what to do.
And to build on that, I think this is a concern for healthcare providers as well.
Yes, thank you.
And I think we really need to make sure there are not only no barriers, but that we are encouraging providers to seek mental health assistance and resources, because it is such a trying and difficult time, and right, there's a rise in physician suicides, and I don't think the medical licensure process, with the nature of the questions they ask around mental health, reassures anyone that there will not be consequences should they seek to do what's right in terms of getting care for themselves.
Yep. Samir, thank you. I was going to bring that up. Thank you so much. And both of you are excellent examples of division directors that really, I think, support your faculty. Obviously, I know more of Samir's faculty than I do Alex's, but I have some Columbus colleagues, and you both set the bar and take care of your faculty, and we really appreciate that. And I would also suggest just binge watching Ted Lasso. So that I think really can help our mental health. And for those of you that have been following the chat, Dr. Bill Cotton will be appearing at the Columbus Funny Bone, 2 shows tomorrow, 7:30 and 9:30, with all of his magnet jokes. So guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is a fantastic way and fun way to end the day.